welcome to this edition of All About Hopkinton. The original HCAM series created to bring you the people and organizations that help make our community the great place that it is. I'm your host, Mary Arnott. There are a lot of people dedicating their time, energy, and talents to improve some aspect of life in our town. I'm honored to be sitting here talking with them and sharing their stories with you. I have the great honor today of talking with Carolyn Dykema, our state representative. Carolyn, thank you so much for taking what must be very limited time out of your schedule to come and talk with us, because I know how busy you are.
It's great to be here, Mary. I am really looking forward to our conversation and to being on your show.
Well, thank you. I'd like to start with a little bit of introduction and have you tell us a little bit about yourself. So we have a lot of new people in town that may not be totally familiar with you yet, and maybe you could share a little bit about your background or whatever you're comfortable with to help get to know you.
Sure. So I am the state representative for Hopkinton as well as 3 other communities. So I live in Holliston with my family, my husband and my now 1 child, but 2 of them are out of the house now. I also represent Southborough and 1 precinct in the community of Westborough. And I was elected in 2008, and I came into office in 2009. And really just proud to represent this district and look forward to meeting some of the new folks who may be in town. And like I said, my husband and I moved to, while I grew up in Massachusetts, I'm a native Massachusetts resident, and in fact have a number of generations ahead of me who are Massachusetts residents as well. So my heart is really kind of here in this area, and we moved to town in 1996 in Holliston. Subsequently raised our family there and took 3 children through the public schools, 1 who was my last one. Our last one is a junior. We'll be graduating next year. And got involved locally. So I first started getting involved in local government through the local planning board and a number of other local boards. Feel passionately about the community of Holliston as well as now my adoptive communities that I represent. And just honored to be representing the people here in the legislature for the last almost 10 years.
Well, I'm sure you're going to have an opportunity to meet a lot of the folks that are new to Hopkinton and the other communities, because you're everywhere. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you keep your schedule. Every time I look at all the things that you're working on, I say, boy, I wish I had her energy and her drive. So thank you again for taking time to be here. There's a number of things in the legislature that you're either sponsoring or co-sponsoring, and I don't know how much we're going to be able to get to many of them, but I sure would like to talk to about some of those things that you feel most passionate about, and I know one of them is clean energy, so I thought we'd start with that one and tell us a little bit about what you're working on with clean energy.
I will, and you mentioned, I've got passions and environmental issues are one of mine, but a lot of the issues that I focus on at the State House are because I hear from people in the community. And clean energy is one that I am uniformly contacted about from the people that I represent, which is why, it's one of the things I focus on. Mm-hmm. I also serve as a legislator on a number of committees in the State House. For those who might not be familiar with the committee process, all legislators serve on a number of committees. I'm on 4. And one of them is telecommunications, utilities, and energy. So not only is it a local concern, it's also something that's part of my job description, if you will, as a member of this committee. And I think the urgency around renewable energy and clean energy, we just came out of a storm here in the Northeast, and I think you see the weather changes, which are climate related, which has really been pushing on the urgency to move toward cleaner energy sources, which has been a priority at the State House. And there's a number of recent pieces of legislation that I think are probably going to move forward soon. I wrote an op-ed in the paper about them with the hope to kind of nudge them along and raise their profile. But 2 of them have to do with creating standards that would encourage the adoption and the creation of more clean and renewable energy, specifically solar energy. So it's an increase in the net metering cap and an increase in renewable portfolio standards, which is essentially requiring public utilities to purchase a certain amount of clean energy. And then there's one other piece that is important, and it's Eversource has added a new fee on residential solar projects, which some sort of fee to maintain the grid was enabled by the legislature, but the way that they've implemented this fee, I personally believe, will really put a damper on renewable energy here in the Commonwealth. So there's been some legislation moving forward that I'm very in favor of to roll that back and really put in place something that's consistent with the growth in solar for residential customers.
And what is that net metering thing that you referred to?
Yeah, so net metering basically allows customers or people that put solar panels on their roof or on their business to sell energy back to the grid. And so that can make it available to other people that access the grid run by the utility companies. And so there is a cap on the amount of energy that can be sold back into the grid right now, which obviously constrains the solar growth feeding into that grid. So we've been slowly increasing the cap kind of periodically. Last time we did it, we essentially reached the cap. Solar was growing so quickly, we reached the cap as soon as it was lifted, and now we're at a point where we need to lift it again. And I think one of the important things as a Metro West legislator, we have a lot of companies here in Metro West whose jobs and whose businesses rely on clean energy and solar. And this, I hear from them consistently that we really need to raise this cap so we can kind of keep this machine of clean energy, which is not only great for the environment, but it's a great job creator and a great economic addition to our region. Keep it going at the speed that it needs to be.
I hadn't even realized there was the issue of net metering until I had read it on your website and what you're working on, and so that's why I asked it too. I want to make sure our audience kind of follows that as
Sure.
well. And you're right about the solar energy. The more I drive around, you see more and more solar panels everywhere. And with new developments like our new school and things, we want to make sure that we're taking advantage of solar energy. And so I'm glad that the legislature and you're helping to drive and focus on that.
And actually, you know, Mary, if I could say, one of the things that I hear back from people who maybe aren't as supportive of the growth in clean energy is they ask about cost. You know, is this going to cost the ratepayer something to do this? And, you know, I think investments are needed, but cost is always something I'm really conscious of whenever we move forward any piece of legislation, the cost of the ratepayer, the cost of the individuals that I represent. And I am very confident that, you know, moving forward with solar is actually a cost winner. You know, I think we can actually control and potentially even decrease rates, maybe not in the immediate short term, but certainly over the longer term by really pushing this renewable and clean energy.
That's good to know. I think along with the clean energy, anything to do with the environment, I know you're very active with respect to water resources and the quality of water. And why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're working on in those areas or what's happening?
So water is something that I was exposed to. As I mentioned, I served on some local boards in Holliston before I took this job, and it seemed like every time I turned around, I was on the planning board, I served on a sewer committee, and water issues kept coming up over and over again. And when I started running for office, I was told that water wasn't really getting much attention at the State House. And I couldn't believe it. You know, if Beacon Hill were representing the interests of local communities, water should be a significant part of the conversation. So I kind of took it as my mission to elevate the conversation around water in Boston. With a little bit of success, I've kind of become the water expert, per se, in the legislature right now. And so we're kind of tackling it on a number of fronts. We've got water quality issues, which we're constantly trying to make sure that DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, which oversees water quality here in Massachusetts, along with our local water departments, is the quality that people need to feel safe drinking our water, make sure they get the funding that they need. There's also, you know, how are we going to invest in a smart way in the type of water infrastructure that we need? So, you know, whether it be sewer treatment plants or water purification upgrades for water treatment plants, you know, how are we going to fund that and looking more regionally so we can take advantages of, you know, other towns? You know, can we share pool resources? And I filed a piece of legislation that would allow that to happen more easily. And one of the interesting things, so I have the water commissioner in Boston sent me over a piece of pipe from Charlestown. And it was from, I think, the early 1900s, but it is literally a piece of tree. It looks like a hollowed out tree, and you can see the bark around it and everything. That is what our water infrastructure used to look like back in the day. One of the things that I have been doing in the legislature is I led a group called the Water Infrastructure Finance Commission, which took a 20-year look at our water infrastructure, which is predominantly underground. So we never see it, so we don't exactly know what the condition is. It turns out the condition is not great, and we've been underinvesting statewide and actually nationally in our water infrastructure. So we have about a $20 billion shortfall over the next 20 years when it comes to investment in water infrastructure. And I've been looking at that, and one of the pieces of legislation I filed is to create a new reimbursement fund. So for cities and towns like Hopkinton who spend money to put in new pipes, replacement pipes, for example, they would be reimbursed for a portion of that, similar to what we do with local roadways from the state. And while I haven't been able to get too much advance movement on that, I'm continuing to raise the conversation, and a lot of folks, including the Mass Municipal Association, are very supportive of that. So keep trying.
Yes, don't give up your efforts.
Right.
I will tell you.
Water's important.
It's one of the things that's on the top of my list, if I were to make up a list of things I'd want you and your colleagues to work on, because there's always issues with availability, quality. Every summer we're always saying, getting the message, don't water your lawns, water restrictions, and the infrastructure. You don't hear about problems, about that until a water main breaks or something underground,
Right.
and then you've got flooding everywhere and stuff. So I'm glad that that's one of the things that you're working on. And continuing along with our theme with things in the environment, I noticed a little pin you're wearing on your jacket there.
My bee pin.
Your bee pin, and I know something that you're working on is relative to bees. So why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, I would love to. I've gotten a lot of comments from people actually right here in Hopkinton and across the district about this, which I didn't expect. I've been working on this pollinator issue for about the last 6 years. And I was introduced to it first. I'd never heard about it until I went to an agricultural commission meeting in Holliston. They had a viewing of a movie called Vanishing of the Bees that I attended just as a community event, really. And it started talking about these specific types of pesticides called neonicotinoids, which are used widely in agriculture, and they're also in home products that you can buy off the shelf as a gardener. And what they are is it's a new type of pesticide which was intended to be safer originally, but it's called a systemic, so it's actually absorbed up into the plant. So unlike normal pesticides, which are sprayed onto the plant and kind of wash off after time, these pesticides are absorbed up into the plant. So every time pollinators, whether it be bees or butterflies or any insect, pollinates the plant or eats the plant, in the case of insects, they absorb some of this neonicotinoid pesticide, which serves its purpose because the bugs that you don't want to eat the plant die, which is the intent. But it's also affecting bees. And the science has been evolving on this over the last number of years, but it's becoming increasingly clear, including a big European Union study that just came out within the last couple of months, that there is a direct correlation, not necessarily to immediate bee death, but bees absorb, because they're consistently present in the environment in very large quantities from what's been measured. Bees absorb them continually, and they start affecting things like their ability to feed or forage, or their ability to come back, find their way back to the hive, for example. So what my bill would do, which I proposed after looking at the issue for a couple of years, is that really to place these types of pesticides in the hands of people who are trained to use them. So, agriculture, anyone who would be using these for crops would be trained and have to actually have a license from the state, which would be similar to the existing licensing process for other types of pesticides. These types would be rolled into that, and anyone who is not licensed to use them would not be able to purchase them or use them.
Well, and it's not just affecting the bees, because I know you and I were talking earlier about that's just the tip of the iceberg, because it goes all the way up the food chain, can affect it. And I had heard years ago about the problems they had in China. They used so many pesticides that killed off their bee population, and now have people who pollinate the plants and the vegetables and the flowers by hand, because the bees aren't going around pollinating everything.
It's true.
So I think
1/3 of the world's food supply is directly needs pollination by bees and pollinators. So if you think about, a major decline in the bee population, which there is, that has implications for global and local food supply. So a lot of reasons to be concerned about it.
Yeah, thank you for focusing on that. I wish you good luck with everything on that one. There's so many other topics that I want to get to. I'm not sure where to go next, but let's tackle transportation a little bit, because that's been in the news a lot with issues on the commuter rail and the T-lines and things. So
Yeah.
what's happening in the world of transportation and legislature?
So it's funny. So when I got this job, when I took on this role, I did not expect transportation to be really the number one issue that I deal with all the time. And now, for the first time since I've been in office, I serve on the Transportation Committee, and I'm the vice chair this year. So it's been something I've been dedicating even more time to over the past year. And I hear about it from constituents all the time. Really, there are two issues. One is tolls, and the second is commuter rail service. And I don't know if you may have seen, but we have a new general manager at the T who just took over, Luis Ramirez.
Ramirez, yes.
And so he came on about 2 months ago, and as a delegation, I'm also the chair of the House chair of the Metro West Caucus, which is a group of Metro West legislators. But we wanted to immediately introduce him to our issues out here in Metro West and why we really need better service on the Worcester-Framingham line. It's an essential commuter route and vehicle for a lot of people, a lot of our residents commuting into Boston. There are 33,000 people from this region that commute into Boston every day, whether it be on the commuter rail or on the Mass Pike. And we have challenges with both. So we are really pushing for Metro West participation in a new visioning study that was just commissioned for the commuter rail statewide, but we really want to focus that and provide feedback from our region on what needs to happen there. And also continuing to work on the issue of the toll equity on the Mass Pike. And I think the two things, the commuter rail and the Mass Pike, are inextricably linked, because if you can't take one, you take the other, right? So if we have unreliable or infrequent service on the commuter rail, you're going to be getting more cars on the Pike. And driving the Pike most days during the week and during the commuter hours, I can tell you in the last 5 years, as can anyone who commutes into Boston, that the volume of Mass Pike traffic is really just tough. It takes me about an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes to get into Boston in the morning, which is not unusual. So we need more people on the commuter rail, which is our message to the T. We need to take people off the Pike for convenience, for employers in Boston who are depending on these employees who are coming out from our region, for the families of these employees who need to have their family members home at a reasonable time during the evening, and for environmental reasons. We need to look at better public transit to get people off the roads. So it's sort of that win-win-win-win if we can get more investment and more attention on our commuter rail system. And actually the other interesting dimension to it out here in Metro West is that we are one of the major employment drivers for the state at large. So a lot of the revenues and jobs that are created here in Metro West benefit statewide coffers. So the state needs to be paying a lot of attention to us, and we've been making that message over and over again. But what we're hearing, and what I heard from EMC for years now, Dell EMC, is the need for reverse commute trains, which other employers out here are talking about as well. Because interestingly, a lot of the young people who maybe before they have families, they like living in urban environments, and Boston is a hot place to be these days, albeit a little expensive. But a lot of young people, which is the talented workforce that a lot of the companies here in Metro West need, are coming from Boston. And they don't want to own cars, they want to take public transit. And we do not have what we call reverse commute trains coming from Boston out to Metro West in the morning and then vice versa in the evening. So we really need to focus on that and make more investment in that as a state as well.
Well, I'm glad you're the vice chair, and it will continue to get a lot of attention, because you're right, it's always in the news and it's always on people's minds.
It is.
Yeah. I can't let you get away without talking about healthcare, though, also, because there's so many issues in the news about healthcare, and of course, Massachusetts has always been a leader in that. So tell me what's happening in the realm of healthcare.
And I know you and I have talked about healthcare for many years, actually. Generally here in Massachusetts. So in Massachusetts, we've had essentially universal healthcare for a number of years now, since 2006. But healthcare is such a large issue with so many moving parts, if you will. I think when we did healthcare reform back in 2006 under Governor Romney, which was sort of an Affordable Care Act before the Affordable Care Act in Massachusetts, there was a sense, there was an understanding that this was going to be an iterative process. It was going to be a work in progress. It wasn't a one-time thing. We were going to continually have to evaluate where we were to always be better, which is kind of what we do in Massachusetts anyway. So there have been a number of iterations around cost control in particular, cost control while providing and continuing to provide the highest quality possible we can to patients. And so there was another iteration of healthcare reform coming out. The Senate put their bill out probably a month ago, and the House bill is in process, will be coming out soon. And one of the major components of that is going to be getting our arms around pharmaceutical costs.
And related, of course, in the news every day now is opioids and overdoses, and I know that there's some things that you're working on with respect to that as well.
This has been an issue that touches, as we were talking about earlier, I think almost every family in the Commonwealth, and it is striking to me how no matter where I go and what audience I speak with, I can mention the issue of opiate and opiate abuse prevention, and people invariably hear personal stories of people that have been affected. So very important issue, very bipartisan issue. This is an issue that crosses party lines, is really a family issue. And I was really thrilled that a piece of legislation that I had filed last session, so about 3 years ago, that would require online prescribing for all opiates was picked up by the governor in his recent bill that he filed to also address the opiate crisis. And what my bill would do really is, until a number of years ago, the federal government actually prevented doctors from sending prescriptions electronically to the pharmacy. You would have to get the piece of paper. So even though all of your other prescriptions could be sent directly to the pharmacy online, controlled substances couldn't. For some reason, back in the day, it was thought that somehow was a safety precaution and would make it harder for prescriptions to end up in the wrong hands. As it turns out, it actually makes it easier, because the number of prescription pads that are stolen or altered when they go to the pharmacy is very high. And in fact, there's been a fairly large lawsuit against one of the major pharmacy chains for filling a very, very high number of fraudulent prescriptions. So New York, several years ago, implemented the bill that I filed that would require online prescribing. So far, they're in the initial stages of rollout, but so far, so good. And most importantly, 70% of stolen prescription pads and altered prescriptions have gone away with the advent of this new requirement online. So I am hoping that my bill / the governor's bill will also pass this session, so we can really start making a meaningful effort toward really getting the supply out of the black market, because that's where this connects to opiate abuse, is that so many people who access the pills through the black market are getting them through the forged and stolen prescription pads. And it's just one thing. While there are many things we need to do, this is one way that I hope that we can really make a meaningful difference.
Well, it's something that's on everybody's mind, and we all hope for good changes, that even if we just save one life, that something good will come out of that. So thank you. And we don't have much time left here. In fact, we're almost at the end, but I didn't want to get away without sharing with our audience that you work on so many major issues, but you also focus on issues that are important, even if it's just to one individual. And there's a little local Hopkinton story you have for us about an issue that you're working on that started right here, and something to do with police and traffic.
I do, and one of our local veterans, Ron Remillard, who has been around town for a long time. He and I see each other at the Veterans Breakfast at the Senior Center quite regularly. And one day he mentioned that he had a personal story where he had been driving and had misread the hand signals of a police officer because he couldn't see his hands. The police officer had been telling him to stop when Ron had thought that he was telling him to proceed. So you can imagine that it was not only concerning for Ron, kind of frightening for him not to be able to see, but also a potential safety concern for the officer. So Ron came to me and said, you know, I really think that we should require our police officers for public safety to wear white gloves so people can see their hands better. So we talked about this for a while, and Ron, I believe, even went down and talked to Chief Lee at the police station about what he thought, you know, what his thoughts were on this. And we decided that to advance the conversation and really see if others were interested in this issue as well, file legislation about it. So I did, and it had a public hearing as required by law in the State House about probably close to a year ago now. And Ron came in and he did a great job testifying and told his personal story. And I was really surprised. I did a little Facebook post on it after, and I couldn't believe the number of people who commented that they in fact had the same problem and they really felt like something needed to be done about it. And that is, to me, the way democracy should work. You know, we get a great idea from right here in the community. I take, you know, great pride, and I find it to be a privilege to represent those concerns up at the State House and start these conversations. It's really kind of a neat thing.
Well, Carolyn, I can't thank you enough for being on the show today, and you must come back because there's so many other issues we want to talk about.
I would
know
love
there's
to.
a criminal justice bill and things you're doing with Alzheimer's, and so we're going to have you back as soon as your schedule allows.
I will look forward to that, Mary.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us for this program and hearing about Representative Carolyn Dykema and all her work. For more information about our state representative, visit her website listed at the end of the show. For more information concerning all about Hopkinton, find us on hcam.tv. If you or someone you know is having an impact on our community, we want to hear about it. Send an email to jim@hcam.tv, and perhaps you'll see them sharing their story right here on All About Hopkinton. I'm Mary Arnott, and thanks for watching.